we're starting John chapter 12. And last week, what had happened was that the Pharisees had their big powwow, their big Supreme Court council, and they had determined that they were going to murder Jesus. Caiaphas the priest said, "Oh, it's better that one man should die than the whole nation should perish." I want you to remember that, because that's going to have something to do with this week. And then, of course, Jesus had to leave, so he went to Ephraim with his disciples. So now he's coming back, and this is the Passion Week. And that's why he's coming back. He's coming back to die. But on his way back, after he left Ephraim, him and his disciples came to Jericho, and they spent the night there. Well, you got to realize that people from all over are headed to Jerusalem for the feast. They all have to go. So they're coming from everywhere. So when Jesus stops at Jericho, there's a bunch of pilgrims traveling. So they all kind of travel together. And the fame of what Jesus had done with Lazarus, it just spread like wildfire. So everybody kind of was excited to be with him, but they also wanted to come and see Lazarus. All right, we're going to start with chapter 12, and I'm going to read a little bit, and then I'll come back and explain it. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. So we find out from some of the other Gospels, this is recorded in Matthew and Mark, that this actually isn't at Mary and Martha's house. It's at a man called Simon the leper. He also lives in Bethany. For all we know, he was a next door neighbor. He could have been someone who Jesus healed. I mean, he's called Simon the leper. I doubt that he still has leprosy. That's whose house he was at. And it says that Lazarus was at the table. So Lazarus and Jesus were like guests at this supper that they were putting on. And then we find out that Martha was serving as usual. That's what she does. And then in verse 3, this is what Mary does. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Now, this spikenard that she had, let me just tell you a little bit about that. Spikenard was imported from India, and it was in like an alabaster flask that was like sealed. Wasn't like our perfume today, where you could just open it, pour a little out, and then put the lid back on. Once you broke it, it's open. Okay? And we find out later in this chapter, when Judas Iscariot is criticizing her, that this ointment is worth 300 denarii. And that is a man's salary for an entire year. So I want you to think about that right now. Your salary for an entire year, imagine spending all that on 1 pound of ointment. That is expensive and very valuable. And she may even have purchased it for her own funeral, that it would be used on her then. But anyway, they call it spikenard because it comes from this plant called a nard, and it's a root, and these spikes grow out of it. So this is a very precious oil that she used. And then we find out in Mark and Matthew that it says, there came a woman having an alabaster box of ointment of spikenard, very precious, and she brake the box and poured it on his head. Okay, well, in John's account, he's pouring it on his feet. With the synoptic gospels, when you put them all together, then you find out what really happened. So what happened was she broke the alabaster flask and anointed his head. And then with what was left, she anointed his feet. So there was a problem there, because then one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, said, "Why wasn't this ointment sold for 100 pence and given to the poor?" So now they're complaining about the woman. They're actually grumbling at her. They were murmuring against her and saying, this is a waste. This is a waste of money. Why are you wasting this on Jesus? The reason why Judas Iscariot said that, and he kind of got all the other disciples going in on this with him, was because he was the treasurer of the group. And I don't know that Jesus assigned him that or the disciples assigned him that, but whatever, he was a treasurer. So when he wanted that money in their little treasury box, because he was skimming off. This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the bag and bare what was put therein, meaning he was skimming off the bag. But Jesus defends the woman and he says, "Hey, she has done a good work on me. Leave her alone. Why are you troubling her? Don't find fault with her. Why are you embarrassing her?" And this is why she did it. He said, "Let her alone. Against the day of my burying has she kept this." So, in those days when somebody was buried, I'm going to read you something here. I'm going to read you about when Jesus was buried, what they did. "And after this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, for fear of the Jews, besought Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate gave him leave. He came and took the body of Jesus. And there came also Nicodemus, which at the first came to Jesus by night, and brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100-pound weight." Think about how much that is. Mary just had 1 pound. That was 100 pounds. "And they took the body of Jesus and wound it in linen and clothes with the spices, as a manner of the Jews is to bury." So what Mary's doing is that she's thinking, unlike the disciples, she actually believes that he's going to die. And she's thinking, well, what if I'm not there after he's dead to anoint him? So she's thinking, he's here now, I'm just going to do it now, before his death. I'll go ahead and anoint him with oil. So that's what she was doing it. It says, "Against the day of my burying has she kept this." And then Jesus says, "For the poor ye have with you always, but me you have not always." So he was only there for a short time. And if she was wasting this on Jesus, that's a beautiful thing. Jesus approved of it. He said, "She's done a good work unto me." So now I want to read in Matthew 26, something else that Jesus said that wasn't said here in John. He said, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, there shall also this that the woman hath done be told for a memorial to her." Jesus was memorializing what she did. That's what a great thing it was, because she actually believed that he was going to die, and she wanted to do something right while he was alive, and she had him in her presence. She had faith. Okay, so I told you that he had been traveling with these Jews that were pilgrims that were all coming. And so when he stopped at Bethany, most of them went ahead and went on to Jerusalem to get ready for the feast. And the people who had seen, the Jews who had seen Jesus raise Lazarus, they told everybody in Jerusalem. So everybody knew that. And now these people who had traveled with Jesus were telling the Jews in Jerusalem, "Hey, he's at Bethany. He's coming. He's going to come." So these people believed on him. And in verse 9, it says, much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he raised from the dead. Wow, that would really be unbelievable to actually see someone who was raised from the dead. But the chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus to death also. Wait a minute. Remember what they said at their council? Caiaphas said, it is expedient for us that one man should die, that the people perish not. Well, now it's going to be two men. These are murderers. They're going to murder an innocent man, Lazarus, just so that the miracle will be forgotten. Because it says in verse 11, because by reason of him, Lazarus, many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. So next we have the triumphal entry. Verse 12. I'm going to read this and I'll come back and explain. I'll read 12 through 15. On the next day, much people were come to the feast, and when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees and went forth to meet him and cried, Hosanna! Blessed is the King of Israel that cometh in the name of the Lord. And Jesus, when he had found a young donkey, sat on it, as it is written, Fear not, daughter of Zion, behold, thy king cometh, sitting on a donkey's colt. So that prophecy, verse 15, is actually a prophecy which is in Zechariah 9:9, and it pretty much says the same thing. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon a donkey, and upon the colt of the foal of the donkey. Now, we know from the other Gospels that Jesus had sent them out to get this donkey and this colt that no one had ever been on. And the mother and the colt, they were probably inseparable. That's probably why they brought them both together. You know, I watch on Facebook this ranch where they show all these beautiful horses and their colts, and they'll have the mom on a leash, so to speak, but they don't have to do anything for the colt. The colt just runs around and stays with the mom. So that's what it was here. The colt wanted to be with the mom. And when you think about this colt, that no one had ever ridden on him before, and then somebody just sits on him, a normal animal would start bucking, but you know what? Not when the Creator is there sitting on him. It was that colt's privilege to take Jesus into town. And so the people ran out to meet him. And first of all, when the disciples brought the donkey and the colt, they put their own garments on the colt for Jesus to sit on. And then the people from the town ran out to meet Jesus. So there were people in front of him, people behind him. And it says that they cried, Hosanna. They cried, Hosanna. And Hosanna means, save, I pray, or please save. And I want to tell you, in the three Gospels that record this, Matthew, Mark, and John, in Matthew, they say, Hosanna, the son of David. That was one of his titles. And then in Mark, they said, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. And then in John, they said, he's the King of Israel. So each one reflects one of his names. But you got to remember that all this time in their sacred liturgy, they'd always heard about the Messiah's coming. And in Zechariah, it says he would be coming in just that way, on the colt of a donkey. And the excitement that they had, they realized that he was their king. And that's why they were taking off their coats and laying them down and getting palm branches and putting them down and waving them in the air. They were all so happy that their king had finally come. This was finally realized. Remember in Matthew's record of Jesus when he was born, and the wise men were looking for him. What did they say? Where is he that is born King of the Jews? When he was a baby. I'm reading this through the Bible. He was called King of the Jews. And then, now, here on his triumphal entry, he's called the King of the Jews. And then, at his trial, what we talked about last week, Pilate is going to declare that he is King of the Jews. And that's going to be written in 3 languages above his cross. That's his title. This is now an act which he performs as a fulfillment of prophecy. He's offering himself to the nation. Now, when his public ministry is over, he does the most public thing he has ever done. He steps out and presents himself as a Messiah, the King of Israel. They acclaim him with Hosanna, save. Please save us. Blessed is the King of Israel that cometh in the name of the Lord. What will Israel do with their king? They're going to crucify him. That's what they're going to do. And that's my lesson.